The Grandview Conservatory of Music had never looked more regal. Gold-tinged lights cascaded from chandeliers as a string quartet filled the air with elegant background melodies. It was the annual alumni mixer, a gathering of old faces with new accolades, tight handshakes, and tighter egos. Champagne flutes clinked between practiced smiles, and laughter floated like bubbles through the lavish ballroom. At the center of it all stood Gavin Trent, the self-proclaimed darling of Grandview. Once the conservatory's prodigious star, now an award-winning concert pianist with a knack for drawing attention, as easily as breath, Gavin relished every second of the spotlight. In his crisply tailored tuxedo and expensive watch, he entertained a cluster of admirers with exaggerated tales from his European tours. And then, in Prague, the critics stood after just the second movement. He said with a theatrical flourish, drawing laughter from a circle. He sipped his champagne smugly, his gaze drifting across the room like a king surveying his court. That's when he saw her. Standing alone by the tall, arched window, bathed in the soft amber light of the chandelier, was a woman in a faded green cardigan. Her posture was reserved, almost fragile, yet something in her silence felt deliberate, like a single note suspended in the air, waiting to resolve. Her name tag read simply Leah. No last name, no title, no grand entrance, just Leah. Her hair was pinned back in a loose bun, her dress modest and unremarkable, and she had barely moved since the event began. Gavin smirked. "She hasn't said a word all night," he said to the group beside him, loud enough for others to hear. "Probably here for the free wine and awkward small talk. Doubt she's ever touched a piano." His companions chuckled, eager to ride his wave of mockery. Emboldened, Gavin made his way toward her, theatrics already brimming in his posture. "Leah, was it?" he began, his voice slicing through the hum of conversation. "We were just wondering, do you play? Or are you just here for the cheese cubes and ambience?" A few polite snickers fluttered through the air. Leah turned to face him, her expression unreadable. Her eyes, deep and steady, met his without flinching. "I play," she said, her voice calm, neither boastful nor timid. Gavin raised an eyebrow, clearly entertained. "Do you now?" he said, gesturing toward the majestic Steinway, grand at the center of the room. "Well then, please entertain us. Give us a little something. Chopsticks, perhaps? Or are you more of a heart and soul girl?" His sarcasm dripped with condescension, and a few people nudged each other, grinning in anticipation of the train wreck to come. Leah didn't respond. She walked toward the piano with the stillness of someone carrying something heavy yet unseen. Her shoes made no sound against the marble. She didn't smooth her skirt or glance at the audience. She sat on the bench, adjusted the height, and placed her hands above the keys with the grace of a diver just before the leap. She paused. Then she played, and in the first 10 seconds, the entire room forgot how to breathe. Her fingers moved like liquid lightning, precise, fluid, impossibly fast yet impossibly controlled. What came out of the piano wasn't just music. It was something else entirely. It was Rachmaninoff, yes, but rewritten through pain, memory, and a kind of mournful fury. The opening notes hit like a storm crashing against stained glass. Gasps replaced laughter. The guests who had expected a clumsy amateur performance now found themselves frozen, mouths parted, eyes wide. Each phrase she played bent the air, stretching it with sorrow, defiance, and something like heartbreak stitched into every note. The piece shifted gears into an explosion of chords so intricate, it was hard to believe only 10 fingers were responsible. The sound filled every corner of the room, shaking even the most jaded attendees out of their apathy. Conversations died. Waiters froze mid-step. People gravitated toward the piano in disbelief. Leah didn't just play. She commanded. She didn't seek approval, she obliterated doubt. Her body moved only slightly, but her soul was in her hands, poured into each hammer strike and each lingering pedal. It was not a performance. It was a revelation. By the time she reached the cadenza, some were standing, tears threatening the corners of their eyes. One woman, an elderly composer from a New York Philharmonic, clutched her chest, her mouth open as if witnessing the ghost of something sacred. The final arpeggio soared and then sank into a whispering end, her fingers lifting from the keys like wings retracting. Silence. Then stillness. No applause yet. Only the stunned reverence that follows something too holy to disturb. Leah stood, gave a small nod, and returned to her place by the window. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply resumed her quiet watch of the outside world as if nothing had happened. Gavin stood near the piano, pale, gripping his champagne glass like it might steady him. His joke had dissolved into dust in his throat. The once playful crowd was now reverent. Hushed. The room had changed shape as if it had witnessed a miracle. Murmurs began again, softer this time, tinged with awe, and then a thin, quivering voice rose from the back. That was Leah Hart, said an old man, his voice cracking. My God, it was her. The name sparked a cascade of gasps, as though someone had just unbared myth. Leah Hart, the piano prodigy who had disappeared nearly a decade ago after a tragic car accident that reportedly ended her career and her life. Some said she died. Others whispered that she vanished out of grief after losing her entire family on the way to a major European concert. No one had seen or heard from her since. Until now. And tonight, with no spotlight, no stage, no introduction, Leah Hart reminded the world who she truly was, not with words, but with sound, not with pride, but with soul. And she had done it not to prove anyone wrong, but to prove to herself that she still existed. Whispers had barely begun to stir when they transformed into a wave, rippling through the once confident crowd like the reverberations of the final chord Leah had just played. Phones emerged subtly, fingers typing her name with hesitant urgency. Leah Hart, once the brightest young pianist in the country, the child prodigy whose name had once shared headlines with maestros and legends, and then, one day, had vanished without explanation. The tragedy that followed her name was no longer just a footnote in music history, but a ghost that had haunted the halls of Grandview for nearly a decade. The details came flooding back to those old enough to remember: a rain-slicked road, a family sedan on its way to Vienna for a debut concert, the devastating accident that killed both of Leah's parents and younger brother instantly. Leah, critically injured, had slipped from the public. Some said she was in a coma, others said she moved to Europe to recover, while most assumed the worst, that the world had lost a soul too rare for this earth. But now, standing just outside the glow of the crystal-lit ballroom, was that very girl, 10 years older, her silence far more deafening than any scream. She had played, not as a ghost, but as someone who had walked through fire and chosen, finally to sing. Inside the hall, the atmosphere had changed. No one laughed now. No one whispered shallow critiques. Instead, they looked to the doors where she had exited, haunted by the storm she had left behind and the aching beauty of what they'd just heard. But Gavin Trent, the man who had made the joke that started it all, could not remain among the murmuring crowd. He stepped through the open doorway into the crisp night, chasing the silence she wore like armor. Leah, wait, he called, his voice echoing off the conservatory's marble pillars. She was standing at the edge of the courtyard, where the trees stood bare under the moonlight. She didn't move until he was almost beside her. I didn't know who you were, he said breathlessly, his confidence now replaced with something close to shame. Leah turned slowly, her eyes the same haunting shade of stillness that had left the room spellbound. That's the problem, Gavin, she said, her voice soft but firm. You never cared who I was. You only cared about who you could humiliate to feel taller. He flinched, her words slicing cleanly through his chest. That's not fair, he muttered, though he couldn't muster even a fragment of conviction. Isn't it? She asked, one brow gently raised, not out of mockery, but like someone who had learned to measure truth in silences. He had no answer. He looked down at the pavement, ashamed, as though the keys of the Steinway still burned into his fingertips even though he hadn't played a note. Footsteps interrupted the air behind them. Professor Monroe, one of Grandview's oldest and most respected instructors, approached with a visible tremble in his limbs. His silver hair fluttered in the cold breeze, and his eyes were damp with unshed tears. "Leah," he said, barely above a whisper, "you were the finest student I ever had, and when we lost you, I never stopped wondering." Leah turned fully to face him, her face softening with something close to warmth. "I remember your hands," she said, "always covered in chalk dust, and the way you cried when I played Liszt for the first time." Monroe laughed gently, the sound broken by nostalgia. "And I remember how you always changed the endings. You couldn't help yourself. You wanted music to feel like life, unfinished, messy, surprising." His voice cracked. "Where did you go all these years?" Leah looked up at the moon, then closed her eyes briefly, as if choosing her words from a shelf too high for most to reach. "Nowhere, really. I hid in places with no music. I worked in a bookstore for a while, took care of old cats, lived near the ocean, so I could listen to something that didn't remind me of an orchestra. I couldn't touch a piano, not even look at one. Every note sounded like a scream." She paused, her voice quieter. "But today, when Gavin joked, when he laughed at me, like I was nothing, I felt something inside me snap. Not in anger, in memory, in need. I didn't play to prove anything to him. I played to see if I was still here." Monroe looked down, overcome. "You are, more than ever. Would you consider coming back? Not to perform, but to teach? Even just once a week?" Leah smiled faintly, then shook her head. "Not yet. Maybe soon. But for now, I need to play for myself again. I need to learn how to forgive the piano." Monroe nodded, respecting the space she still needed to protect. Gavin, still rooted beside her, finally found his voice again. "What you did in there wasn't just playing. You dismantled the idea of what music is. You made it human again. Like you broke open the instrument and let its soul scream." Leah gave him a long look, this time less cold, more curious. "I didn't do it for them," she said, "but if they heard something real in it, then maybe it was worth coming tonight." Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked down the garden path, her figure shrinking into the moonlight, her shadow long and elegant against the stone. Back inside the conservatory, the energy had shifted. The chatter was now reverent. The students, especially the younger ones who had only heard rumors of the lost genius named Leah Hart, were shaken. Some were crying. One girl whispered to another. She played like she knew every secret the universe was hiding. Professors who once held tightly to their reputations now looked humbled. Even the dean, known for his pomp and unshakable detachment, had removed his glasses and was wiping his eyes. Gavin re-entered the room slowly, as if crossing into sacred ground. He walked to the Steinway, now a monument, and sat on the bench. He placed his fingers on the keys, lightly touching middle C. But it felt foreign now, plastic, distant, lifeless. He played a note, and it sounded hollow, like it came from the hands of someone who had never felt anything real. He withdrew his fingers. Leah had not just outplayed him. She had redefined what playing meant. He had made a joke at the expense of a stranger, but in return, he'd received a lesson that would echo for the rest of his life. Leah Hart hadn't returned to prove herself. She had returned to reclaim something no one ever truly saw: the weight of survival, the courage to play through grief, and the impossible beauty of rising from silence. And that night, her name wasn't just remembered, it was reborn. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Expect Stories, where every tale is more than just fiction, it's a reflection of the strength within us all. Drop a comment below and tell us, what would you do if you were in Leah's shoes?